Welcome to Prime Suspects. We've got a full house this week. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Adam, welcome back after the week off. First things first, how was your time gallivanting across New York with none other than Kevin Costner?
Yeah, Yankee Stadium's a nice place. Kevin's a wonderful guy. Got along like a house on fire. Both have 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. Yeah, and apparently owned a casino once that didn't make any money up in one of the Dakotas. But yeah, all in all, New York always gets the juices flowing when you get up there and then, rub some shoulders with some different people and it gets your ambitions going or whatnot. But Yankee Stadium, never been there, going through those corridors with all those pitches and, not being American, not being baseball, sort of growing up with it. Those Yankee hallways, and even though it's a newer stadium versus the older one and whatnot, but yeah, just another bucket list item of stadiums to go and visit. And it was a decent game, few rainouts, but baseball, while it's slow and whatnot, I think they're good games to sit at and have a beer and a hot dog and a drink and a chat and all those kind of things. It's a good atmosphere,
especially when you're in the company of John Dutton himself. But moving on from that trip and bringing you back into the fold here, since your last appearance, the NBA Finals have wrapped with the Thunder claiming their first championship since relocating to Oklahoma City. How was the result for the book?
Overall, it was a good series. The Pacers early on, every game, we needed the Pacers, so they got the ones that they needed. Lose game 2, which you normally do when it flips the other way. Oddly enough, going into the last part of the series, we needed the Thunder in a bunch of those games as well. For game 7, we had some big series positions. It would have been loved to have got them knocked out, but with that injury in the first half, it just was a foregone conclusion, it felt like, in the second half of game 7. But all in all, I know we spoke, I guess, a few weeks ago about the volume and how the series was. It was a cracker of a 7-game series. Even game 6 in particular ended up a good result because just the underdog went one way and stayed one way. Have that come back to close to 0, then you have a bad result. But I think for the books, it was a good NBA Finals.
And Joe, would be curious to get your thoughts from a fan's perspective. As Adam alluded to, Tyrese Haliburton's Achilles injury took a lot of air out of the balloon early on in game 7. But still, we saw a series go the distance, some thrillers, some blowouts. How'd you perceive it at the end of the day?
From a basketball perspective, it was great. Going to game 7 was outstanding. Even with losing Haliburton there early in the first half, Pacers were up at halftime. There was an awful lot of dreamers out there that were probably starting to pump a couple of nickels into the miracle machine. Not surprised with the final result. You can't lose your best player in a dominant player sport like that and expect to be able to close out. But from the league's perspective, they should be pretty happy that they now have 2 more teams that they can add here over the short term, over the next couple of years, that they can be plugging. I talked to one OKC resident today, wanted to know, hey, does this mean we'll finally get a Christmas Day game from the NBA? I said, yeah, maybe not. But I did think also, the game, of course, for our industry was not without its controversy with DK refunding Haliburton props and FD not. FanDuel not doing that. It's always interesting. It's like injuries are part of the game, guys. The guy had been playing for 12 minutes. So all in all, if you're a really good fan of hoops, you couldn't have been any happier with this series, regardless of what the brands were on the jerseys.
And Adam, with the NBA and also the NHL seasons now in the books, we've entered the dog days of summer, at least as far as the U.S. sports betting calendar is concerned. So how are Prime and Betcris using that relative downtime between now and football season kicking off?
Taking bets on the Gold Cup, the FIFA Club World Cup. We've got a British Open coming up soon. There's Wimbledon. It's getting ready for football season. Yes, trying to keep the lights on and pay the bills with taking bets on these lesser known sports. But right now with Prime Sports, we've just rolled out a new UI in Ohio, New Jersey. Kentucky should be open mid to late July. Then for Arizona, for Betcris, rolling out a similar new UI for them as well. So it's just getting ready for football, starting to have the conversations about, sign-up bonuses, reload bonuses. What does that look like going into the football season? Even preliminarily leading up to that sort of Hall of Fame game and preseason, the beginning of the college football. But really right now it is get ready for football. What do we need to do? Get the machine well oiled, get the journey sort of built out so it's, as frictionless as possible and as enjoyable as possible, because we're the underdog and ultimately we're competing with the big boys, and we need to sort of do a few things in a different manner to try and just make the process easier, and ultimately just being able to have that experience of getting a bet on, getting your deposit in, getting paid quickly, and just sort of, again, it's football season. We're getting ready for football season right now.
And while it may be a chill time on the betting calendar, things are always heated on gambling Twitter, with FanDuel and its terms and conditions taking center stage this week. For background, on Monday night, James Wood of the Nationals homered against the Padres, hitting the final leg of a very long shot parlay that cashed for a lot of FanDuel customers. According to many on Twitter, FanDuel then changed its terms, reserving the right to void bets made by a group of people acting in conjunction with each other, leading to hashtags such as ScamDuel going viral. Since then, industry voices such as Captain Jack Andrews and Jeffrey Benson have provided rational counters to the outrage, but the noise has largely drowned out their attempts to set the record straight. Joe, as Benson noted, these weren't new terms and conditions and were originally created in the context of FanDuel's kiosk business. Nevertheless, the Discord crowd seems to be interpreting this as FanDuel targeting them. What's your take on this whole situation and where the truth lies?
Well, never let the facts get in the way of a drama queen festival. I mean, look, the guys in the Discord crowd, they got my respect. Everybody's trying to find a way to win in this world. It's a tough world being in this business, and if you're on the other side of the counter, you got to be nimble. You got to see this kind of stuff coming. But the suggestion that overnight FanDuel changed its T's and C's just so they didn't have to pay out to this group is just horseshit, okay? And they can yell and they can scream as much as they would like, but the fact is at least the way they didn't violate any regulations maybe, but they clearly violated what were fairly long-standing regs or fairly long-standing T's and C's in FanDuel's agreement. Nobody ever bothers to read those, okay? People are always hustling past that so they can get to their bonus, get to their deposit, get to playing or anything like that. But, somebody could probably do a little bit of T&C arbitrage out there if they really did start to dig into those things and see what are the nuances that they could take advantage of. But crying after the fact and trying to make it, all they're really trying to do is they're trying to shame FanDuel into a position that's complementary to theirs. It's not going to work. They might as well just stop and find the next angle to shoot.
And at the very least, by the letter of the law, it sounds like FanDuel's in the clear here. When we think about the spirit of the game, Joe, am I off base in thinking that if FanDuel was able to identify this as a group of people acting in conjunction with each other, then maybe they should have just voided the bets from the outset, not after the final leg hit in dramatic fashion?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, what do you think? There's anybody here is virginal white? This is a tough business. FanDuel, if they detected it early on, they let it ride. And then when it didn't go their way, they enforced their T's and C's. Shocking. Is anybody on this podcast really shocked at that? Like I said, it's a tough business. The lead whiner lost $11. Okay, time to move on. Find another angle to shoot.
And moving right along, Adam, want to get your perspective here as well from a risk management and trading point of view. How much does a sportsbook the size of FanDuel actually care about the risk of long shot parlay bettors, even those that come in large numbers from platforms like Discord?
I can't imagine they'd be too concerned about it. But didn't the players all get paid out in the end? Like, isn't that what it's at the end of the day? FanDuel paid everyone that had that ticket, and this is kind of a mute point in the end that they make it.
I don't know. Did they? That's the thing. It's like so far. I mean, if they got paid out? What are they yelling? Hashtag ScamDuel and shit like that. I don't know. It's been a long day. I didn't stay on top of it all day.
No,
I've had other things to do. But if they got paid out, one, FanDuel are a bunch of pussies for caving. This is the shit that galls me about this industry is, like using the Tyrese Haliburton thing as an example. It's like, look, every time one sports book caves and thinks that they can get an advantage, usually because they didn't really take much on player props when somebody gets injured, and so they throw that shit back to the players, it creates pressure on everybody else, and it's like you either got to do it every time or you got to listen to people say like, oh, if you're a real sports book, you'd have refunded it. No, if you're a real sports book, you'd say injuries are a part of the game. The guy played for 12 minutes. Shut up and sit down. I try and be fairly pro player, but, sports books don't sit there to be duct taped into a chair and be punched in the face by the public. So
Yeah, I mean, this is a horrible TNC. I will say that.
nobody's going to argue about it. But as soon as those guys, nobody can say well, I didn't read it before, or I didn't. Everybody has access to that shit right before they put their money in and all that. They don't read it.
Yeah, but the other aspect of it, I mean, look at the play, look at the parlay. How many other tens of thousands of times has this person released a similar parlay that everybody's followed in on, and it's gotten beaten and they've all paid them?
Dozens, maybe dozens, or
I'm guessing it's thousands of these.
yeah. I mean, whatever it is, that's why I said it's shocking. They let it ride, and when it hit, then they pulled the TNC ejector button. I don't think anybody's surprised. Are they acting as particularly, I don't know, sporting and honorable guys in the 19th century manner? No, they aren't. But at the same time, everybody who went onto that site agreed to those T's and C's. And did FanDuel give themselves a little slack to get out of their little tight spot? Yeah. Are they shits for doing it? Yeah. All right. Tomorrow's another day in sports betting. I'm sure we'll see it again.
I just can't believe that they wouldn't have paid it for a couple of $1 million when they're pulling in how many billions a year. I guess it'd be interesting to see if there is any update on this and if they actually did pay it out, because you'd be taking these bets all day long. There's no way to prove it, even using the TNC, that there was a group of people defrauding, but you'd have to go back through and look at the many other times that they did it and lost. These are just bets that they should be taking and then eating, paying out, and moving on.
But that would be if they were good if they were good bookmakers like you, Adam. They'd realize that the $2 million that they would have paid out on this one would have led to 9 figures in handle of guys hey, I'm going to do a 10-leg home run SGP myself every day. They would be making in probably 10, 20, 30x in handle and hold what they would have paid out last night. But they're not bookmakers. They're marketers. So you think of it the right way. They're not thinking about it the right way.
I'm going to jump in for a moment and play my journalism card for the second week in a row, because if my real-time research is serving me correctly, courtesy of Google Gemini, so it can't be wrong, FanDuel has paid out the $2.2 million tied to this bet, despite having the right to void their group bets according to their rules. While they paid it out, we've seen clearly a lot of outrage and conversation around these rules existing in the first place, to Adam's point. And one thing we haven't touched on yet that I've seen others reference as well is that it's perhaps a bit hypocritical coming from a sportsbook that has worked with influencers, celebrities, whatever label you want to use, such as Rob Gronkowski, to build out parlays and urge people to go ahead and follow them in conjunction with one another.
Wait a second. Did everybody in America just wake up to their friggin' ridiculous practices today because of this one thing? Of course it is. You look at ESPN, all their on-air personalities talk about conflict of interest. They've all got their stupid little parlays and bets that they're building up to the point that they're running an ad campaign around it, right? That's the thing. Do they enforce their T's and C's when it's convenient for them? Yes. Do oftentimes their T's and C's exceed the laws and the regulations regarding gaming? Of course they do. This is where other operators have an opportunity. Hey guys, if you had maybe made this bet with Becker's Arizona or Prime Sports, maybe today there would have been no holdup, because they're real bookmakers and they don't hold up people like that. And they don't suddenly go looking for ancient text scrolls and T's and C's every time a result maybe doesn't go their way. But if you want to keep playing with people who are going to hose you at every top opportunity they get, and then be surprised by it, despite the number of times it continues to happen, well, this is your devil's bargain.
I think the passion throughout this segment illustrates why it was indeed a topic this week, but we can go ahead and move on now from a twisted tale of one sportsbook and its terms to a tale of two states. It seems likely that New Jersey is going to officially increase its tax rate to 20%, up from the current rate of 13%. Joe, what do you see as the short-term and long-term impacts of this change?
I mean, short-term, congratulations, New Jersey. You can hold your head up high when you walk into the bar next to, New York and Pennsylvania and Illinois, and no longer feel like you're short when it comes to taxing people on sport, or taxing companies on sports betting. Congratulations. Long-term, New Jersey is the most expensive state in the country to do business. One of the reasons why it had that tax rate was so that New Jersey would be able to not only offer the industry, but also be a magnet for people to set up their operations. And in fact, the majority of operations servicing the U.S. sports betting industry are headquartered in New Jersey. And so right now, by making themselves more expensive, even more expensive to do business in, if you are somebody who, look, margins are getting tighter and tighter, and it's not getting cheaper to compete in this industry. And, if we're 8 years in, there's plenty of states out there that have now legalized sports betting that could be good domiciles based on their workforce, the cost of doing business, the local tax rate. New Jersey, maybe they weakened their hand. I say they did. And, maybe gave an opportunities to some of those other states that might be able to put together a better package and say, bring your jobs over here. Okay, bring your investment over here. And if you're hunkering down for the long haul in the United States, then, New Jersey may have been really good to you for the first 8 years or so of this industry, but it's becoming more and more hostile when you have lawmakers who they don't bother to consider the second order effects of the things that they're doing or look at the full picture of what they were getting in this deal. So I'm very disappointed with New Jersey, obviously. But you know what? It might create an opportunity for a Michigan or an Indiana or a Kentucky or someplace like that to make a compelling offer to those places to attract those jobs and those investments away. And in the end, then New Jersey really will miss out, and this will have been probably in the long run a negative move for them.
And continuing with that theme of one door potentially closing and another opening, Adam, we just saw March numbers released for Arizona, which was the 5th largest state by handle for the month, per ingame.com. It's also the 5th consecutive month that it was higher than neighboring Nevada, historically regarded as the epicenter of sports betting. All in all, what do you see as the main drivers of Arizona's growth, and how temporary or permanent do you think its newfound lead over Nevada may be?
Well, I will say this. First report I'm looking at, and in March, we did make more than Sport Trade. So, I know you had the co-host last week. But I think, and it's odd because Arizona, when we met with them in Arizona a few weeks ago, they were saying how much of the sweepstakes and the gray stuff and, these popping up illegal casinos and all those were kind of hurting what they thought is their bottom line, which sort of shows that Arizona has a hell of a lot of growth within it still beyond whatever these numbers are. For me, I think Arizona's in a great position, which is why we headed that way. You've got California that's not open yet. You've got Nevada, which people are looking to cross border because there's a lot of operators that don't exist there. New Mexico, only retail only. I believe Utah touches them there somewhere as well, which we don't see sports betting going there. And it's at 10%. I hope they, keep it at 10% because I'm quite happy to sort of dig in and try and make Arizona as big and as strong as possible with picking up a lot of this, niche markets that they may not capture right now. But all in all, do look at it though, and there was $47 million made and 50% of that was free bets. So there's always an underlying figure of then how much was that volume, how much was given away and stuff like that. So numbers are numbers. You can make them sort of look and see how they are. But once you dig in, maybe they're not as rosy as what it looks like on the top lines. But still, I think it's a good state. I think they're, competing in their area and their space. And for me, I wish Arizona all the best.
Joe, I heard you mention a few states that could capitalize on what may be a case of New Jersey weakening its hands. I didn't catch Arizona on that list, but based on Adam's comments and your broader knowledge of the space, could that also be a state in the mix to potentially surge if New Jersey cedes ground any further in the future?
Oh, heck yeah. Not just because of its position, but, the U.S. population has been migrating slowly and now, considering the weather and the temperatures, somewhat inexplicably, southwesterly. Arizona has been a growth state. It's why it's grown economically, politically. It's become huge. It is quite cosmopolitan for being where it is. And it's a state where the per capita disposable income for, entertainment and things like that has continued to grow. I believe it's a top 10 state for that. So demographics are certainly at work here. And, it's a great alternative for a lot of people who have been fleeing from California as far as technology jobs, looking for alternative venues to set up shop in because of some of the factors that we were just talking about with New Jersey. So absolutely, I would think that Arizona would be a great place to set up shop. And honestly, I hope Adam sits right across the border from Nevada and continues to drink the milkshake of Nevada and Las Vegas. And we have a lot of friends there and everything. It'll be a nice, healthy, friendly competition, but I hope he wins.
And just to go back on New Jersey, I mean, leave sports betting alone. They could have went to 25% on the iGaming, left the sports at 13%. They're still not correlating that these are two different worlds, and raising it on the iGaming and the casino stuff is one, going to be a lot more profitable to them, adding 5% on that versus adding 5% on sports. And again, it's just getting hammered right now, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it's funny. Like, I was making statements, obviously, on Twitter, and I got called out by a couple of people. Shout out to Sprott's Better and the Shipper. Always good to get their input, right? On this, and like, why do I seem to oppose every tax increase, not just the ones that are happening in states like New Jersey that, you know, have big net employment for the industry, big investments and things like that. And really, it's rhetorically pushing back everywhere on tax increases because nobody's showing the math, I guess, is the best. Nobody's showing their work on this. These are seemingly, there's been zero public debate. I joked with them today that I think between the three of us, we had more public debate on the issue than in the last 3 states that enacted tax increases combined. There's no discussion about like, okay, well, this is why we think this is the right number. There's been nothing like that. There's been no opportunity, you know, for the industry to come in and make their case. This is just happening, like they say, happening in the hallway. And it's happening at the last minute, at the tail end of the budget sessions, and they're just being jammed in there. And to Adam's point, showing how absolutely ludicrous not showing the math and making the deal was in New Jersey is that they overcharged the sports books and completely undercharged the online casinos. If you're an online casino operator in New Jersey right now, you think this is the greatest deal in the world. So it's getting incredibly frustrating to see the industry continue to just be essentially a lawmaking dartboard. Well, let's just pick a number and throw it at the board and we'll see if it sticks without really having any kind of, and I think we all know that the trend is towards higher tax rates. We're not going to see 10%, 15% for long. It is going to start creeping up closer towards 20%, 25%. It's probably inexorable. But how we get there, how it can be structured to still, like New Jersey could have done it in a way that would have still given them an opportunity to give breaks to people who were employers, who were investors, things like that in the state. Instead, it was just an across the board, let's let it rip and let the chips fall where they may. And that's the thing where you're eventually going to see a breaking point with licensed operators where they're just going to say, is this worth it? If you want to set up a duopoly, if you want to make it possible so that only 2 companies here can really operate with any level of profit, you're going the right way, guys. Or if you want to set the ground for eventually just handing all of this over to your state lottery so that you can maximize the amount of money going back to players while extracting the highest amount of money that the government can in the form of taxes, then just give it to your state lottery commission. It'll be a crap product, but you will accomplish those goals. If you want commercial operators in your state and you want them to invest and you want them to go the expense of driving this revenue, collecting that revenue, and then you taxing them, why you continue to punch up on the guys playing by the rules and make it hard for them and not even really discuss it with them, I don't know how you think that that's sustainable. But I'm sure I'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about that next month in Louisville at the Nickel G's conference.
And sticking with that point, Joe, I think a recurring theme on this show has been an understanding that legislators can be spread so thin, it's hard for any one legislator to be an expert in all domains under their jurisdiction. So I hear you with the frustration of not seeing the work getting shown behind some of these tax increases. And as I hear that, I think about your experience helping to overturn PASPA, now being a board member of American Better's Voice. So with your relationships with people that will come into play in Louisville in short order, are there any other walks of life where you have seen tax increases that you could get behind because of transparency and perhaps a more proper process that you could share with legislators as an example of what you would like to see more of in the sports betting space?
Actually, I'm going to twist your question with my answer here a little bit, and more so in that I've been thinking, why is it that the gaming industry, amongst most of the quote sin industries, are not passing on their tax increases to the consumer the way, say, tobacco and alcohol in those industries do? We're an industry that we bury the costs of those taxes to the consumer. Okay, my son, unfortunately, wanted to know the difference between a pack of cigarettes here in Virginia and a pack of cigarettes in Illinois when I took him out there to Chicago a few weeks ago for a summer internship. And the difference was about $12. A pack of cigarettes that was $9 here was an additional $12 out there, and it was almost entirely state tax levies. Okay. And now, did the tobacco industry in Illinois decide, you know what, it's going up $12, but we're going to eat that? We're not going to pass it on to our consumer. No, they don't. And it's the same thing with people who produce booze and other things. So, and by doing that, they make the consumer feel these tax increases, and it gives them leverage to push back on state houses when they say, hey, look, we want to keep raising taxes. Okay. The gaming industry hasn't done that so far. And it does, with this kind of token fee that now FanDuel and DraftKings have said that they're going to charge in Illinois because of the tax rates there. Okay. I wonder, okay, well, just like, high tax rates have really kind of taken off and become a trend on the lawmaking side for operators, is this going to lead to a trend of like, well, look, the only way we can kind of try and rein this in is by like, well, we got to make the consumer, who's the ultimate, that's where all the revenue comes from. We got to make them feel the pain. Or where does this all end? Does it end at like 60%? Does it end at 70%? Those tax rates, because you can't say no, because we just keep having all these arbitrary escalations year after year. So that's the thing I think about when I realize it kind of turns your question around a little bit, but I do wonder, like, at what point does the industry stop eating these costs and start passing them on to the consumer?
And Adam, as I hear that from Joe, I'd like to bring you in perhaps for a last word here, because my thought is when you're laying the standard minus 110, it's hard enough to win given the current state of affairs. So if any added costs get passed on to bettors, it's going to make it damn near impossible for even the few winners that currently exist to keep on winning. What am I missing with that whole dynamic about costs possibly getting passed on to customers in a sustainable future state?
Well, that's it. I mean, how do you do it? Because then the unregulated market just grows because someone else can do it with no overheads and things like that. That's where they've gotten it all wrong, in a sense of, Joe kept saying, if you want to continue on this path and build the unregulated market, then continue on this path, because that's ultimately what they're doing, to be able to offer, and you'll still capture a bunch of it. I mean, the Bovadas and some of those things where a lot of that smaller player was, they were minus 115 on a lot of stuff, or they were treating multiple variance lines to square plays versus sharp plays if they had any, or anything of that nature. Or they were having, the Patriots a shorter number to Boston bettors, and, Bears shorter prices to Chicago bettors and stuff like that. You can play those games. Or you can just shut down straight bets and do minimum 3-leg parlays only. I mean, all you're going to do is ruin the product. You'll still keep some of those players, but ultimately people are getting smarter. They're getting access to whatever it is they need. And with the internet these days and the way of moving money and credit cards and the ability to, all you're doing is building up their unregulated market. I thought the whole point of all of this was to try and bring that revenue into the tax streams and all those aspects. And it's kind of like a 70% return to player versus a 95% return to player slot machine. That, like FanDuel and DraftKings, now the regulators, legislators, whatever it is, are just trying to take way too much, way too quickly, and they're just hitting the gambler at every point, whether that's an operator that's trying to build a business. It's really becoming unsustainable for a lot of these states, and it's like, why bother? Become a prediction market, become sweepstakes, at least until it lasts, or go back to, other unregulated. It's near impossible to build anything outside of this. And you have the duopoly up at the top, but all the others, I mean, the next 4 or 5, you've got, MGM, which casino has a little bit of sports. Caesars, try into that. You got fanatics that, depending on how much of their business overall is actually the gambling aspect versus their merchandise, stuff like that. Yes, Bet365 is and has built their stuff and their background off global gray, black, white markets. So they have a big tanker ship to try and go in and compete in some of these markets. But I imagine one day as well, them will sort of say, well, why are we going to be paying 51% taxes? This is unsustainable. Let's just go back to our Chinese market and our Middle East and all these kind of things. It's very hard to sort of be optimistic in any of this as we try and push forward.
But as a final note, to let lawmakers off the hook somewhat, and post-PASPA, the industry primarily was represented by the bigs, by the Fan Kings guys and the two casino corporations. And they largely sold this industry, legalization, on the back of being an ATM machine. They sold it on the handle numbers, not the hold numbers. They sold it on money extraction, revenue coming back to the states. So how can you fault a lawmaker when time is tight, when money is tight, to come back and just, fine, let's squeeze more money out of this. This is what this was supposed to be doing anyway, right? Because the industry didn't make a case anywhere else to, but we could create jobs, or we could create investment, or we could do this, or we could do that. They just made themselves a source of revenue. So of course lawmakers are going to go back and squeeze as much revenue out of them. So in that regard, I don't blame them.
Well, I guess I should have known who was going to truly have the last word, even when I attempted to tee it up for Adam. But I appreciate both of you guys humoring me with a few off-script follow-up questions to take us home today. To the audience, whatever the future holds for taxation rates across states, sportsbook terms and conditions, and the dog days of sports betting summer in the United States, thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Hey everybody, jumping back in for a quick moment before we fully sign off on this week's episode, wanting to extend well wishes to a friend of pretty much everybody in the industry, Dave Sharapan, going through a lot right now. And personally, I've met Dave at Bet Bash. I've been able to see the brightness and energy he brings into just about any conversation, following his work from afar as well as in person during some excellent summer days and late evenings in Las Vegas. Joe, I know you had some well wishes to pass along as well, so wanted to hand it over to you.
So, yeah, as Matt was saying, I think a friend for all of us, myself, Matt, Adam, but also one of the greatest guys in this industry, Dave Sharapan, otherwise known as Sportsbook Consigliere, has one of the best daily shows, along with his partner, Matt Peralt, with Bostonian versus the Book. We were sponsors this past NFL season. But I've known Dave for a long time now. And is there anybody in the industry with a more impressive hat and jersey collection than Sig? I don't think so. But he's one of those guys that if you know him a minute, you know him a lifetime. He's just one of those kind of guys. I don't think there's anybody who spent more than a couple of minutes with him who doesn't feel like he's a lifetime friend. He really is one of the great guys in this industry. So when the news came out that, 5 years after Dave endured and recovered from stroke, that now he's battling cancer. So next week, he's going for cancer surgery in the UCLA Medical Center. In the meantime, some folks in the industry have set up a GoFundMe campaign because Dave being self-employed, while he's out of work with this, he has to support his family. And he's got a lovely wife and 3 daughters. So far, the campaign's raised over $35,000. It will leave the address for the GoFundMe campaign in our show notes. But don't think of it as a donation. Think of it as an investment in keeping one of the greatest guys our industry has, one of its best ambassadors, around for a long time. So please join me with wishing Dave nothing but the best, buddy. And for good luck, make sure you're wearing your Eagles hat before that operation. But we wish you nothing but the best. We're looking forward to seeing you at Bet Bash in August and for many Bet Bashes beyond. All right, take care and God bless.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.